Stuart, thank you for talking to me. Before I ask you about the events of the 24th of June 1978, can you please tell me your involvement previously in activism?
Probably pretty fragmented in a way. I was involved with camp when it was at Balmain and 33A Glebe Point Road. Then there was the Gay Solidarity Group, and around the time of AIDS, there were many organisations, gay organisations. Community Support Network was one. So there are activist organisations.
On the date of the 24th of June 1978, there were three main events. There was the March in the Morning, which was the first one. Were you present there?
Yes, I'm only relying on my memory, but I think I was taking photographs. I took a few photographs of the march, but it was really impressive. There were a lot of people.
And then there was another event at Paddington Town Hall. I think it was a series of meetings. Were you present at any of those?
I believe that I was. The only reason I say that is that I have a photograph of Paddington Town Hall and some of the people that were there, and I do recall it. It was a busy day.
Now, the evening parade, the big parade, which has now become the Mardi Gras that we know today. You were there, weren't you?
Yes.
Were you one of the organisers? Did you know the organisers?
Look, I think everyone was an organiser. No, I was not an organiser. I was a participant. The principal organisers, I think, were basically Lance, who organised most of the things and did the driving.
Lance
Gowan. Yes, I understand that he acquired the police permit. How he did that, I have no idea, but he did.
Now, do you remember what time the march started?
It started a bit later because there weren't that many people there. It was just a bit ragtag. So I think we waited probably about half an hour or more until a few more people arrived.
What kind of time of night would that have been?
I can't remember what time it was due to start. I'm sort of thinking about 10:30. 10:30.
That's the time that others have said too.
Oh,
10:30.
Yes.
What sort of numbers of people do you remember?
It took a while to get started, so I'm sort of thinking maybe 200-300, but my memory is a bit wonky there. But we weren't all sort of packed together. We were spread out a little bit, so probably the perception may have been bigger. But in those days, you weren't really counting. We didn't count people.
And this was at Taylor Square, wasn't it?
Taylor Square, yes.
Then you all got marching or parading down Oxford Street towards Hyde Park. What do you remember about that?
I wasn't really part of the march in the sense that because I had been working as a reporter, I probably was more interested to see what was happening. So I was following the march or the parade along, just basically watching people being near the truck, that sort of thing, just being a curious observer.
Were you there in a capacity as a reporter?
Oh, no, it was just that I had observed. I was observing things, and but in a very benign way. But as with the previous march, I'd taken photographs, and I think I had my Pentax Spotmatic 2 with me, so I took some photos.
So some of the photos that we have seen on websites and books and things were taken by you?
I have absolutely no idea. I can't remember. But yes, I expect I've got a book of negatives in here that I'm going through now, so I can actually establish what I took. But we didn't expect anything to happen. It was just, you just took some photos.
As you were going down the street, Oxford Street from Taylor Square, do you remember a police presence?
Yes, the police were there. I don't recall anyone hurrying us up at that time, the time we started. But yes, the police were there, and that was normal in the circumstances. It was because Oxford Street, or at least half of it, I think, was closed to traffic, so the police had to be present.
What was the atmosphere like at that stage going down Oxford Street?
Oh, I think it was quite It was very cheerful, you know. We weren't all dressed up. I wasn't dressed up, but Kim and Ron were dressed up in that famous photo. There were a pile of women there who I think it was a bit of a nippy night, and they had their overcoats on, things of that nature, and it was very cheerful. It was cheerful, and there was music playing from a cassette player.
So was the approach more of a carnival and a fun parade than a protest?
It was absolutely meant to be fun. It was meant to be fun.
And then you went down Oxford Street, and I've heard that people came out of the bars. Is that how you remember it?
Funnily enough, I don't remember that. Maybe I was too close to the front. People say that they did, and I believe them. But I don't know how suggestible people would be at that time of night. But clearly, more people were interested in joining the group. Just attracted to it.
Were people chanting?
I expect there was chanting. I don't recall any chanting. I think it was meant to be a party atmosphere. The political march had occurred in the morning. This was fun.
It went down Oxford Street to Hyde Park. At what point did trouble start?
Trouble, from my recollection, started when Lance turned the truck into College Street, just a short way into College Street, just around the corner from Whitlam Square. And then there was some trouble with the police. I wasn't absolutely clear about what was happening, but I saw things happening, and I saw Lance getting into difficulties.
You mentioned a permit which Lance had acquired. Do you remember what the permit granted exactly?
I have absolutely no idea. I'm assuming that it fixed a particular time for us to start, and we were late when we started, so I don't know if that sort of pissed off the police a bit. And it would have given clear directions as to where we started and ended the Mardi Gras parade.
And you mentioned the problems on College Street near Whitlam Square with Lance. How did people end up going down William Street? What happened?
Well, I blame Jeff Stanton, although I'm told Jeff McCarthy could have been the instigator. But it was either Jeff, and my recollection, it was Jeff, who I believe had loud hailers. He was the one, from my recollection, because I believe I was looking at him, and I thought in my mind, no surprises here. He shouted out words on the loudhailer to the cross, and we had nowhere else to go, so we did precisely that. But the atmosphere had changed. There was a different feeling. The police were behaving differently, and so the mood changed.
Were people walking to the cross down William Street or running?
Oh, I think it would have been a quick walk. I don't think we were racing up to the cross for any particular reason. But I spoke with Jeff Stanton the other day, and I asked him why the cross, and he said, "Well, that is where all where the police had firm control over crime. There were prostitutes, there were gay bars up there, although I asked him to name them, and he did name a few. Yes. So the cross was clearly the place. There were bright lights, there was lots of activity, and there were people who would have been sympathetic to deviants like we in the march.
And why do you think so many people did go down William Street? Why don't you think they stopped where the permit had told them they should stop?
Oh, they were just being bloody minded, very, very typical Red Raggers. Because even though it was a fun march, we had enjoyed it, we'd listened to music, and we had a truck. It was, it was nothing really, but we made it fun. But the people who attended, I think of Cecily Davis, I think of Jeff Stanton, I think of Lance Garland, and there were many others who'd been at the morning march, but they had a political bent, and so it didn't take very much encouragement to simply put two fingers up to the police and press on up to the cross.
You went to Darlinghurst Road. towards King's Cross, which part of King's Cross, towards, was it the Alamein Fountain?
Yes, yes, it was.
And was King's Cross police station there back then? Do you know, the one near the fountain?
Yes, I'm sure it was there, and of course now I'll be disproven, but I'm sure the police station was there, and there was the detectives, because I'd worked as a journalist for the Sir Frank Packer's Daily Telegraph, and I worked in police rounds with the famous Sid Colbert. So I was monitoring police radios. I knew what the police did, that sort of thing, and in Darlinghurst the detectives also had their spot, and there were a number of detectives who were photographed sort of punching some of the protesters. There's a well-known one of me.
Yes, go on.
Of me and John Whitty, me standing stupidly there, and John in his trench coat on the other side, while this huge thug in a white jacket is punching someone, and there is another police officer with a cap on. So I was definitely there because I was photographed, but I don't think I was that close to the Alamein Fountain, but maybe close enough. Maybe close enough.
You had taken photos, you said, on Oxford Street, of the parade going down Oxford Street. Did you take any photos of the scuffles in King's Cross?
I'm not sure. Probably not. In those days, I'm sure I had an extra roll of film, but I was shot in black and white because colour was too expensive, and I could never afford to have the negatives made into positives. So I think I probably ran out of film and was just clutching the camera. So there's nothing else I could do.
And going back a bit, when you got to King's Cross, at what point did the police start getting violent? And how did it start?
My recollection is that they were already there, and they were already there. In reasonable numbers. There were the paddy wagons. I'm assuming that the lights were, I don't know if the lights were on, I can't actually recall the police lights being on, but the small paddy wagons, yes, they were there, and then they became very aggressive.
Were you arrested?
No, I was doing my usual cowardly thing of being an observer, and just watching what was happening. But for me it was more than that. I'd grown up on the North Shore, and fairly quiet, not so ordinary life, but I had never seen violence on this sort of level. I had never seen this level of aggression. Obviously other people like Sasha Soldertow, may he rest in peace, Ken Davis and other people were fully aware of the sorts of things that the police got up to. But in those days, you didn't hear very much about the sorts of things that happened in cells. To see the violence on this scale, and we're not talking Tiananmen Square, this was a minor scuffle in comparison to the horrors of things like that. But in Sydney, it was very unexpected. And remember that probably most of the people on the Mardi Gras were basically educated middle class on the whole.
There was also a state Labour government at the time. It was Mike Rann, wasn't? Not Mike Rann, Neville Rann.
Neville Rann, yes, it was.
So you were standing on King's Cross. How were you feeling when you saw this violence and people being arrested?
Oh, it was surprise and shock, and I think anger. And of course it turned out to be a very late night. We had to go to Darlinghurst lock-up. They weren't taken to King's Cross police station as far as I know.
But just going back a bit, did you physically see people being thrown into vans, into paddy wagons?
Yes. Like, they weren't being beaten with truncheons as far as I'm aware, but handled really roughly, enough to shock a nice North Shore boy.
But you didn't see any police using batons or their fists or...
Oh, using fists, yes. But things were happening in different areas of the cross, and I didn't see everything. So,
And at what point were the prisoners all taken away and the police just left and retreated?
I don't recall. I can't remember. I've got to be honest. I know that the word got around that the arrested were being taken to Darlinghurst police station,
Do you know how
which
many?
was notorious in its own right. No, I don't know how many were taken.
I think it was around the 53 mark.
About 53.
Around that.
Right. Because I think later on in the morning, I went to the city lockup, which was in a little side street off George Street, and we waited there as well. I think the women were taken there, but I do remember that there. I think I recall there was chanting outside.
Do you remember any of the chants?
No, but I do recall. I think I recall one woman. Whose name would probably mean something to you, got down on her hands and knees and started making pig-like noises, I think in the hope of getting arrested as well. It was that nasty and aggressive. There was a great deal of anger at the time. And when we heard that, was it Peter Murphy?
Peter Murphy.
Had been beaten?
He was beaten, yes.
I do recall, I think I recall David Marr being there before he became well known as a reporter, and there were some solicitors. John someone or other was there.
There was also a doctor, I think, who went to check up on some of those.
That may have been Lance's former partner, whose name I can't remember. They lived in not Stanmore. I forgot the name of the road, but they were well known. Lance and he and a few other people lived in the house.
And
Metropolitan Road, Enmore. Yep.
And had you heard that apparently some of the prisoners said they could hear all the chanting from the protesters outside?
No, but that was the point of the exercise. There were big metal doors. The vans had already gone in previously. I think I may have seen another van go in, and I think we may have shouted out to the van, but I'm not surprised they heard the chanting.
And do you remember how you got the prisoners out?
There was a whip around for bail money. I think I'm assuming they were kept in the cells overnight, and they were presented before the magistrate the next day, or whenever it was. I can't recall, but I remember standing outside with a huge lineup. Not even I could get in. I had a press pass outside the magistrate's court in the central magistrate's court. Not even I could get in. So the actual time frame, I don't know. Things were happening very, very quickly.
The names and jobs, and I think addresses even, of many of those arrested were published in papers such as the Sydney Morning Herald. Do you remember if any celebrities or politicians came on board to back those who'd been arrested, to try and get all the charges dropped?
No, I don't. It was practice to print the names, the name, address, and occupation, sometimes of people who were charged, whose names were big enough or the stories were interesting enough to get into the paper. And I think the legal basis for that was supposed to be that people who were arrested and appeared before a magistrate didn't suddenly sort of disappear as they do in other countries. So the names were actually identified, people were identified. This was a bit different because the names which appeared in the Sydney Morning Herald, James Fairfax, the chairman of John Fairfax and Sons, was gay himself, well known, what they would have described at the time as an Eastern Suburbs queen. And I wrote to James, and I knew him through another friend called Mervyn Horton, who was an art collector, and saying that I was rather shocked that the names were printed because none were found guilty, but by implication, by simply appearing in a list of names of people who are on a gay Mardi Gras, by implication, they were at risk, because I think homosexuality was still illegal. I think it was 14 years imprisonment, something crazy like that. Yeah.
And I've heard cases of some of those who were arrested fled Australia because their families all found out and they cut their ties.
I did hear of someone who came to the United Kingdom, but I don't know anything factual about that. There was an article just recently with Jeff Chips McAnulty,
yes.
And he said that he, I think, was sacked because of his name appearing. But forgive me, this is too much information. There's no room left.
The charges, were they all dropped, or were most of them dropped?
From my recollection, all were dropped except one.
Was it Peter Murphy?
And it could have been Peter Murphy, and I can't understand. There was some, but effectively they were all dropped.
Now, going forward to the apologies, the first apology we had was from the New South Wales Parliament earlier this year, 2016. How did you feel about that?
Well, you know, they had to get in quick. There not much of it. Many of us left, for pity's sake. But is Neville Rand still alive? Because
no, he died a few years ago.
He died a few years ago, right. I'm not in touch with Australian news so much. It's a pity that the apology didn't come from him, that he didn't act sooner in changing the law. And I think that's an interesting story, how he actually decided. He went away, landed back in Sydney, said, I'm changing the law. Yes, it was a nice gesture, but many lives were certainly changed. But the police did a wonderful thing by simply overreacting. They radicalised so many people, and in a way, that they were the ones who caused this vast organisation called Mardi Gras.
Do you think the police were looking for a fight that night?
Individually, probably many weren't. They probably just wanted to finish their shift and go home and didn't want any trouble. But King's Cross was the fief of people like Abe Saffron, Dawn O'Donnell, people who had behaved illegally at times. Is Dawn still alive? I don't
She has died as well.
Oh, she has.
Yes.
Oh, well, then I can say whatever I
Is that what you like?
Good. And you know, her behaviour was absolutely appalling. Overpriced drinks, fire issues, and for that reason I was thrown out of GSG because I got the bars in Oxford Street closed down after one candlelight rally, and they knew who'd done it because I was doing their PR, and I'd raised the issue of fire hazards in gay bars. Capriccio's, for example, only had one exit. But yes, the police made money out of the gay bars. That was well known.
Do you carry on?
And so they had to prove something. So I'd say it was basically the detectives and people who were getting money.
Do you think they were partly motivated, apart from obviously by corruption, do you think the police were motivated to be violent and to arrest people because of homophobia, or because you were standing up against their authority? Or both?
Individually, I expect there were some gay police officers among the ones who were involved in the fracas. But yes, homophobia, certainly, like the detectives, for example, would have known, you know, the places like the barracks and some seedy bars around the place, and what went on, and they may have found that quite distasteful. But yes, it wouldn't surprise me. Homophobia for some of them, certainly.
You said you don't recall people coming out of the bars on Oxford Street. What about in King's Cross?
Oh, you had the audience was ready-made. You had the prostitutes, the sex workers, who didn't have the easiest of lives, and their pimps would have been paying the police at times, or the prostitutes would have been paying the police with sexual services. You had people who had a bit to drink. There were bright lights. There were a few gay bars. People were just curious, and so it was magnetic. So there were a lot of people around.
We went about the apology earlier, and going back to the apology, you mentioned it's a pity that Neville Rand couldn't give it, obviously because he's not alive, but it would have been good. What about the fact that it was delivered by the Liberal MP for Coogee, Bruce Notley-Smith, who himself is openly gay, but not delivered by the current state premier, Mike Baird?
Oh, it's just pure cowardice, but that's typical of Australian politics, and it has been. I worked as a news editor for Ken's radio station, so during the Joe Bjelke-Petersen era. So I know how people kowtowed and how they lived in fear of the reaction of the voters.
Do you feel the parliamentary apology goes far enough?
No one who gave the apology was old enough to have understood what happened then. They were born well after, so no. But it's been done and it's recorded, so it's a landmark in itself.
How do you feel about the apology from the Sydney Morning Herald from Fairfax?
The first one was very half-hearted. I think the second apology, I don't know how many more we're going to have. That's good. I think the new editor, or the current editor, hit the nail on the head, explaining the situation of the paper, and it, in retrospect, it was wrong, and it was wrong at the time. It was wrong at the time. It should not have happened. And anyone who read the Sydney Morning Herald that day, did it appear in any other newspapers?
The Sydney Morning Herald is the one everybody's focused on. So I'm not sure about all the others.
Right. That's something I can't recall. But the Sydney Morning Herald was what you read when you wanted serious news. So it was a bit surprising that they didn't think more about it. I suspect that it was probably more down to what's that wonderful expression? Cock up
Yes.
Rather than deliberate. I think whoever was working over the stone, which is, in those days they had what was called the stone, thought, oh, this is a good story. We've got all these names. Stories will come out of that as well. And they thought, right. It was late at night. They probably had a few glasses of brandy out of the bottom drawer, and thought, yes, we'll print it. What would be interesting to know was what discussions actually went on at the time. But the police had obviously given the names. But I think there was one name which appeared, was it Emma Thompson or something like that, that a number of the arrested gave a woman's name, the same name, and presumably the same address. And but that wasn't reported in the Sydney Morning Herald. So
Do you remember if at the time of the first Mardi Gras, if what was obviously a limited gay press back then was supportive of it?
I recall, I'm sure that it would have been, but I can't recall the magazines. Like, I worked for Campaign, and I don't know who the editor was at the time. Was it Frank Wells? Frank Wells? Dave Sargent, was he around? I can't remember. But yes, it would have been supportive, but I don't know if they actually had any reporters there, did they?
I'm not sure. What about the pubs and bars, the commercial side of gay life? Was that supportive?
Oh, of course not. Heavens above, they were there to make money. And I think on a previous occasion, once again, I was doing the PR for, I think it was Gay Solidarity Group, which was just writing a press release and taking it around to the newspapers. It just meant, because I knew the journalists that I was giving it to. But the gay bars, no, they were not supportive. If a poster was put up on the wall, it would come down very soon after. They saw these things as being political. They didn't want that. They were run by people who wanted money, and they weren't, regardless of their personal views, the management wouldn't have been seen supporting something like this.
The final apology came from the New South Wales Police. How did you feel about that apology?
that was, I think, very, very encouraging, irrespective of what you think of the views of some police. And we're all individuals. Everyone has got their own story. But it's good, and it's also good to know that there are police officers who are gay and who are welcomed by the police force. I think my big shock years ago was a police officer friend of mine, sort of going and sitting down with his girlfriend and him sort of rolling a joint. And I think, you arrest people who do this. This was a bit of a surprise. So I realised that morality or values were very much a movable feast.
The apology didn't come from the Commissioner himself. It came from one of his senior officers, Tony Crandall. Do you think it should have come from the Commissioner, or are you happy with the apology as it is?
Oh, if there'd been a degree of courage, yes, it should have come from the Commissioner. What reason did he give for not? What reason was given?
Apparently, on the day of the apology, he was away.
Oh, he was
elsewhere in New South Wales.
Elsewhere in New South Wales.
And Tony Crandall, who's involved with the GLOW officers, he gave it. And he's always been, well, for a long time, been involved with Mardi Gras. But a lot of people have said that it should have come from the boss himself.
So it was a good day to bury bad news.
Yes.
Fair enough. Okay.
That's what's been argued anyway. How do you feel about the police marching in Mardi Gras?
Oh, I'm very. I like it. I think it's good for the police officers to have people supporting them. The world has changed, but there was a time when the police did some very harmful things, and continue to do harmful things. You have to look at Turkey, see what the police force is doing there these very days. But yes, a degree of but it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago.
On that first night, that night on the 24th of June 1978, when you were parading, did you ever believe that what we have now would be the result of that? That the Mardi Gras, we have the gay and lesbian Sydney Mardi Gras, would be what we have today?
It was never planned to be political. The Mardi Gras was meant to be a Nisa, an enjoyable occasion, get into fancy dress, walk a short distance, have some music playing. But in a way, it did become political, which is wonderful, and we didn't expect that.
But did you have any inkling that it would become such a big, famous world event?
No, I think it was just going to die a death. It was just one of those awful incidences that happen in your life. You see something happening, but by some magic, things changed. And then there was the second Mardi Gras, and I remember there were all sorts of interesting things happening around that. Would the same thing happen to the marches? And we were prepared for it. So it was the second Mardi Gras that really, in a sense, changed things, because the foundation was the first one, but it was built on by the second Mardi Gras.
How do you feel about the Mardi Gras today?
I haven't been there for several years, but I remember getting the milk, collecting the milk crates, having a huge pile of them, and getting my nieces and nephews a great position to watch it. It's wonderful, and it's interesting when they have the bus sitting at the top of the bus. But you realise that all the young people down below don't have a clue about that night and what happened. So it's they applaud and whatever, but it's sort of nice to know that you were there and that something changed and it has become the event that it is.
So have you been on the 78 bus at Mardi Gras?
Yes, I think several years ago. I think I went with Rosie Doyle and Steve Warren and Joseph Chikuti, and don't forget that the other people who were involved in the first Mardi Gras, Camp was involved. I think Peter Trabilko, and John, and there were people from Camp, which was far more, would be described by the Red Raggers as being too conservative. So there were two organisations involved. But the Red Raggers weren't the type to really kick up their heels. I think Ken Davis wore a frock or something like that and had a megaphone, but he would have seen oh, there's a little squirrel up there.
Very cute.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Very London thing.
And yes, so camp had a great deal to play in this, and I think that's never been adequately recognised. And there's a story there. Peter Greenaway and his partner John.
When you're on that bus, people are cheering. As you said, a lot of young people do not know the history of Mardi Gras. But when some of the older people, or those who may have knowledge of the history of it, are cheering and applauding you, how does it feel to be receiving that applause and cheers when you're on that bus?
Oh well, looking at all the craggy faces around me, they're probably saying, "My God, is that my future?" You know, so I'm going to look like that. And yeah, we're not the prettiest bunch, and we're certainly decreasing in number, but we're here, and it's also got to be recognised that Mardi Gras for us has also looked through the lens of the advent of AIDS and the many people who are not here who would have been on the first Mardi Gras. So yes, after Mardi Gras, other things happened as well.
What advice do you have for the organisers of Mardi Gras today to improve it? If you have any.
No, I the only advice would be to, well, not advice, but I just send them well, we don't have cartons of wine. What do you call them in Australia now? The boxes of wine.
I know the one, yes.
Yeah, cask of wine. I understand there are all sorts of exciting things, but politics were just wild back then. People hated each other, they got along with each other, they were screwing each other, they weren't screwing each other. It wasn't a quiet, nice little organisation. People could be at each other's throats. But the critical people for the first Mardi Gras, as far as I'm concerned, Margaret Mann, she was very much involved. Ron, I can't remember the name.
Austin?
Ron Austin, dear old Ron, I phone him up. He loves getting the occasional phone call, he and his cat, his blind cat. Jeff Stanton was absolutely critical because as far as I'm concerned, it was either him or Jeff McCarthy who said to the cross, and they changed everything. Otherwise, we would have just dissipated into Hyde Park. Nothing would have happened. So if it came down to one particular person, the Mardi Gras otherwise would have been a forgotten event, I expect, and maybe not even happened again because I think GSG would say that it would take too much organising. But it happened. But it was Jeff Stanton or Jeff McCarthy who made that first cry with the loud hailer to the cross, and that changed everything.
A couple more questions. What advice would you give the Stuart Round of 1978?
To have written down more things about this occasion so that when one William Broome stuck his awful...
I'm good at that.
The camera or something in front of me, I had more facts at my fingertips. But that's what I recall, and it may or may not be accurate, but I'm pretty confident that it's the general state of affairs.
And finally, what advice do you have for the young activists of today?
Oh, no, I'm keeping out of that. None whatsoever. No, you just follow your heart. Your heart, you do what you do. If you get thrown out of an organisation because you believe in something particular, don't be frightened. But on the other hand, where you find injustice, do something about it. But to the young activist, I would say, get out of Australia. Go to Turkey. Go to Uganda. Go to places where civil rights, in particular gay rights, are most appallingly abused. And if you have the mettle for it, do something there.
Stuart Round, thank you very much.
Very welcome, William.